My name's Rico Mandel, and I've got a company called the Rico Group, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit about my story and about myself. I'm not used to speaking in front of cameras. Matter of fact, this is one of the first times that I've talked about my stuff, and so please bear with me. When growing up as a kid, I just was enamored with business. I learned photography at a young age and became completely obsessed with that, and that brought me into working in photo stores and that kind of a thing. And eventually I got a job working at a black and white custom photo finishing lab, which was a cool job. I had a blast doing it, and one of the things that ended up happening was I found out that the business was for sale, and I had customers starting to come up and say, "Hey, Rico, you should buy the business. You should buy the business, and why don't you buy the business?" And I thought, I had never really thought about having a business, or at least buying that business. I thought that I was going to be a while before I owned my own business. So I ended up talking to a guy that I knew in high school and asking him if he'd be interested in being my partner, and he said yes, and I used my bar mitzvah money, and I ended up buying the business. And when I bought it, it was losing money, but I knew that wasn't an obstacle. I knew in my heart that I could easily turn it around and bring it into the black. And within a year, we did that. We brought it into profitability. I had, done a lot of sales work and opening up new accounts, and I loved talking to my customers, and I was teaching photography, and everything was just humming along. I mean, I loved this business. I would work 15-hour days easily and not even think that I was working. There were days that were more difficult than others, but bottom line was, I loved it, and it was a lot of fun. And then the second year, my partner and I basically had differences of opinion on where we should go at that point and how things should be. And so, long story short, the business closed a year later, and I was pissed off at my partner, and I needed to get another job. And I found a job working at an ad agency, a Hollywood ad agency. And we made movie posters and did all the ads for magazines and newspapers, and I was working in their photo department. And when I had time to spare, which was a lot during the day because a lot of work came in the late afternoon, I would go and hang out at the different departments and learn what they were doing and see the kinds of things that was happening, and that was always great. It was fascinating for me to see what they were doing, and through this, I learned how ads were put together, and I learned all the different steps and all the different elements. And then I became the manager of the photo department, and I started setting up systems and putting things in place there, and dealing with vendors and dealing with supplies, and learning more and more and more about the business. And I remember at one point starting to think to myself, well, Rico, when are you going to go into business for yourself? When are you going to finally take the leap and become a photographer, and actually get out there and be a photographer? Because I was obsessed with photography ever since I developed my first roll of film when I was a kid, and it was just something that I just lived, breathed, and ate all day long. I used to hang out in camera stores all the time. I used to go to trade shows, whatever I could do to learn more about photography, that's what I did. And so so at one point I walked into work, and basically they says, Rico, we've let you go. Here's 2 weeks worth of severance, and goodbye. And I was just kind of, all right, well, I guess I'm starting my photography business now, and the universe has kind of told me what to do. So I got myself a phone, and I got myself some business cards, and then what? It was like, okay, now what am I going to do? So I'd kind of go and hang out with some of the vendors from the agency, because one of them had a dark room, and I was over there one day, and one of the neighbors from the industrial park came in and said, hey, we're looking for a photographer. So they said, well, Rico, why don't you go talk to these guys? So I did. And these guys were knife manufacturers, but they didn't make like kitchen knives. They made like what I call killing knives, mercenary knives, and they made hunting knives and knives for sportings. And for me, that was just gold, because I could let my imagination just go completely wild and creating all these photos, James Bond themes and, jungle themes, whatever, And so they were my first client. I started doing all their work, and then they started asking me to make their ads for them, and they started asking me to make their catalog sheets for them, and I said, yeah, sure, I can do that, not a problem. And I'd go back to the agency guys, and they'd help me out and put that together, and things were kind of humming along, and I would basically do all the work myself at that time. But I needed more clients, and I didn't know what to do. So I talked to a friend of mine who was doing sales, and he had his own business, and he says, look, you need to get on the phone, you need to make cold calls, you need to talk to people and see what you can do. So I did that, and I got a picture of him. He said, you got to make 20 calls a day. So I got a picture of him, and I wrote 20 calls a day. I put that in front of my desk. So I had that there. I had my phone. And where am I going to get phone numbers? Yellow Pages. I had my Yellow Pages. Well, who am I going to call? Well, I always thought manufacturing was really cool because I loved the Industrial Revolution. And I loved studying about it, and I loved seeing how things were made, and I liked taking things apart and building things. And so, okay, I'm going to call manufacturers. So, okay, I'm going to call them. Okay, I'm going to call them. And I'd just sit there at my desk, and it would take me half hour, sometimes 45 minutes before I'd make the first phone call. And then I'd get up and walk around, and oh no, what am I going to do? Okay, I'll make another phone call, and another. And finally, I'd kind of get in a groove, and I'd make the calls. And my friend helped me develop a script, and I kept refining that script, and that's how I got into business, and that's how I started getting customers, and that worked great. And then I started doing Yellow Pages ads, and that worked great. And and I was able to build my business and keep building it. And then and I had 4 employees at one point, and I had a nice space, and I had all these people working for me and vendors and all this, and everything was kind of humming along. And then the .com bubble burst, and things just started crumbling. And I'm going, oh man, I was stressed out. I had all this overhead. I had been making 8 million calls every day. I was just a machine on the phones, and always talking to one person after another, and when all this stuff started imploding, I mean, it was the .com bubble, and then some customers started going, and customers started putting things on hold, and then things started to recover a little bit from then. And then once 9/11 happened, then that kind of everything was done. And the one thing I realized up until that point was my business was me, and I was my business. It was kind of like I couldn't really differentiate between the two of us. So I ended up going into a major depression, feeling terrible, moping around the house, driving my wife crazy at the time, driving everybody nuts, and I ended up going to culinary school. And the one thing that culinary school did for me was it got me out of the depression. It got me into something else. It allowed me to learn other processes, which I use some of that in my business now. And the most of all, it really separated myself from my business. So I was no longer my business, and it was no longer me. We were two completely separate entities, and I could do other things too, which was really cool. So I was working in the restaurant full time, and I was doing my marketing on the side, and that was just too much. So I ended up putting the culinary work on the side and going back full time into marketing, and did it the same way I did before. Okay, get on the phone, make 8 million calls, and I'd make more calls, and I'd keep making calls. And now instead of 20, I had to make 30, and then it was 40, and then it was 50, and finally it was just kind of like I could make 100 calls in a day or 80 calls in a day and still not speak to anybody. And that was just getting frustrating, and I didn't have time to do all that work, and I had to find a better way. So I started to look into a lot of online and digital marketing, and what were some of the trends going on there, and started to study about social media and about email marketing and about LinkedIn and some of the directories. And because I had an offline or analog background, I was able to use all the stuff I learned in the analog world and serve my clients in the entire realm. So not only was I able to serve my clients with analog stuff, but now I'm also able to give them all the digital stuff and bring them into that. And when my clients tell me how their business is growing and what's happening in their businesses, that's what really juices me up. That's really, makes me happy, because for me, the biggest thrill is seeing my clients do well, and work with my clients and to make them happy. And that's something that I really love to do. And so I hope this has given you a little bit of insight as to where I'm at and how I got here. And I look forward to giving you a little bit more as time goes on. All right, so thanks so much for letting me share this with you.